वेलकम करें तो अब दूसरा पॉट आपने भेजा था वो किससे दिलवा रहे थे बरकरार तो वो रखे उस चीज को अगर
Hello, 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 mic test, hello, hello.
वो अगर मना करवा यानी ले आए या फिर ठीक है जब आपको आपका पहला मना करते तो वापस अगले डॉक्यूमेंट्स को ठीक है फिर तो क्लियर ये लाइट्स को लगा स्विच देख लो कौन से
Himani, you'll handle the lights as well.
ये वाले दो स्विच है बेटा ये दोनों ही बंद कर देंगे हम ये वाले दो स्विच ये मत करना बंद नहीं तो इससे सारा बंद हो जाएगा जस्ट टेल जैसे पीपी के भी चल रहा है ऑफ टू वर्क वी कैन कीप दिस लाइट्स ऑफ यूजेस पीपी so we'll do it चल हां ठीक है बता दो पूर्व
We'll be back to our scene.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. A very good morning to everyone present here. It is with immense pleasure that I, Siddhant, along with my co-host Ritika, promulgate that Bricolage, the English Literary Society of Shaheed Bhagat Singh College, is embarking on a new lecture series for the academic year 23 to 24. Today, We welcome you all to its inaugural session entitled Shakespeare and Indian Theatre by our esteemed speaker, Dr. Vikram Singh Thakur. Now we request everyone to please stand up for the Kulgeet of our university.
जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम श्रेष्ठ सुंदर दिव्य दिव्य विश्वविद्यालय विहंगम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम सकल वसुधा निज कुटुंब की भावना संस्कृति सनातन आधुनिक शिक्षा पुरातन ज्ञान धाराओं प्रसंगम देश की स्वाधीनता हित भूमिका शतकोटि वंदन निष्ठ कृति सत्यम के मंगल की विभावों का समागम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का आलोक अनुपम भव्य महाविद्यालयों के परिसरों से चिर सुशोभित श्रेष्ठ गुरुजन कर रहे थे छात्र और छात्राएं दीक्षित सदचरित्राचार पावन साधना संकल्प संयम नवल वैश्विक चेतना नव क्रांति संस्कारों का उद्गम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम श्रेष्ठ सुंदर दिव्य दिव्य विश्वविद्यालय विहंगम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम ज्ञान का आलोक अनुपम ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम ज्ञान का आलोक अनुपम
Thank you.
Bricolage, a reputed society of Shaheed Singh College, has always taken immense pleasure in hosting an exciting array of student activities, both academic and extra-academic in nature and scope, appealing to the sensibilities of students, faculty, and participants alike. In keeping with the etymology of its name, Bricolage has been working with the values of diversity, heterogeneity, and creativity in organizing various events over the past few years. It has organized lecture series wherein specialized and reputed scholars from multitudinous fields have been invited as speakers. These speakers have guided their audience through a fascinating journey across various aspects of literature, critical thought, and creativity inside and outside the classroom, as well as interdisciplinary studies, which involve the integration of knowledge and methodologies from multiple disciplines to explore complex topics, questions, or issues.
Continuing with this tradition, Bricolage envisions to organize a lecture series de novo to establish a common platform of intelligentsia in our college for interactive sessions on contemporary knowledge around Indology and how the Indian knowledge system gets seemingly weaved together with the canonical as well as the Commonwealth's literary works for cosmopolitan space of engagement. Today, we bring this riveting session to discuss the influence of the celebrity of the literary world, William Shakespeare. This lecture seeks to explore the presence of William Shakespeare within the Indian artistic world and illustrate how the dynamics of theatrical performance in Indian theatre are interwoven with the literary works of this renowned playwright. We all have lived Shakespeare's words. the devouring emotions, at once foreign but so familiar, the terrifying murderous shadows of his tragedies, and the glee of his comedies. This passion for Shakespeare gradually became alive in Indian theatres from the frail pages of his plays. We have seen the impact of works inspired by Shakespeare in Indian theatre. Saptapadi, Srimati Bhayankari, Bhranti Billas, Hemanta, and Zulfikar. The intricate wordplay, the profound themes. But amidst of all this aestheticism, the lurking discussions of body politics, socio-political implications, birth and death, love and hatred, the mystifying word. But what is it that has made Shakespeare's influence eternal? What is this irreplaceable entity of his works? What can and should we do with Shakespeare's works in our Indian classrooms and theatres? Hopefully, our discussion today, aided by a guest speaker, will help us answer these questions.
With such thoughts, I, behalf of Bricolage, would like to extend a hearty welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Vikram Singh Thakur. Dr. Thakur holds a Ph.D. in Comparative Literature from University of Hyderabad. He has been teaching literature at the School of Letters, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi, since 2011. His research interests are eclectic and vary from drama, theatre, and performance, Shakespeare Studies, Postcolonial Literatures, Partition Studies, to Sufi Poetry. His monograph Shakespeare and Indian Theatre, The Politics of Performance, was published by Bloomsbury in 2020. Despite the world coming to a standstill in 2020, the book managed to find a place on the shelves of leading libraries globally. The book dwells on the fascinating story of the languages of India that have absorbed Shakespeare's work and have transformed the original educated Indian Shakespeare into the popular Shakespeare practices of the 19th and 20th centuries. And the unique urban folkish tradition in post-colonial India. And we are glad to know that Dr. Thakur also enjoys Hindustani classical music, writing, acting, and cooking in his spare time.
Dr. Thakur has been awarded a 3-month international scholarship for a short-term research project by Utrecht University, the Netherlands. He was nominated for the British Commonwealth Split-Side Fellowship, UK, by the University Grants Commission, India, in 2009. He was also presented the Erasmus Mundus Category A Scholarship for MA in International Performance Research in 2011. It is a great pleasure to have you here today, sir.
Now, I request the teacher in charge of the Department of English, Dr. S. Vardharaj, to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Vikram Singh Thakur, with a potted plant.
I would also like to invite Dr. S. Vardharaj, teacher in charge, Department of English, to extend a formal welcome to our guest speaker and give his opening remarks.
I can speak from here, no problem. I hope I don't need a mic as of now. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
So, this talk is really strategically important for me for 2-3 things. Let me quickly finish my remarks. I really thank my dear colleagues, Dr. Sarvjit Katoj and other team members, arranged for this wonderful talk. Because 2 weeks back, I read somewhere that some of the universities, especially in UK, are going to consider as Shakespeare as an outdated author, or maybe they are planning to stop teaching Shakespeare. But there are 2-3 important things here. See, I always love fusion, be it music, be it culture, be it anything. Now, teaching Shakespeare in India is something a marvelous, wonderful experience, because locating Shakespeare in Indian scenario, in the Indian socio-political, psychological scenario, is really kind of a tough and a complicated task, which, of course, our speaker he has been doing and will also address his experience as a theatre specialist with us, number one. Number two, words are always alive. I strongly believe some of the words of Shakespeare are alive and will be eternally alive with us. Because they do carry some amount of significance, universal, irrespective of a particular region or nation or particular culture or language, crossing across, going beyond the mediums. Right? They do live, they do extend their power through the speakers, through the theatre specialists, through the audience, and through the textbooks. So, with these remarks, I hope this day will mark a kind of an important, a significant change in the understanding of Shakespeare with us through this wonderful lecture, which you are going to listen to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words.
So, without further delay, I request Dr. Vikram Singh Thakur to begin with his address. Over to you, sir.
Let me see. You can turn off. Yeah, Maki sab, yeah, that's fine. That should be fine. Can you go to the first slide? It's the third, I guess. Make it full screen. F5, I guess. Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Am I audible? Let me take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to the principal, Professor Arun Kumar Attri, Shaheed Bhagat Singh College, my senior colleague, Dr. Katoch, whom I have known for past more than like 15 years now, head of the department, faculty members, staff, and students, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with all of you. My special thanks to Apurva for her efforts in coordinating this event. We have been on WhatsApp over the past few days. I mean, I've been asking for things, and yes, so it's been a pleasure getting in touch. And thank you for coordinating the event. Well, before I speak, just go through the first, second, third slides. That sets the tone for my lecture. So let's go to the first one and the second one. Next. Yeah, just hold on. So it's Shakespeare, Sheshappa Iyer, or Shakespeare. These are the names that have been given to Shakespeare in our love, in adapting and appropriating Shakespeare. So Tamilians would say, Shakespeare asli mein Shakespeare tha. Yeah, Sheshappa Iyer tha. And Karnataka and Kannada, they would say, okay, he was a peer who was writing plays. In the popular sort of image, I mean, if you look at the first one, of course, is very Indian. The second one in the popular image is Jurwa Bhai Kumbh ke mele mein kahin kho gaye the. I mean, that's, of course, Shashi Tharoor. And the third one is, a Kathakali performance of Shakespeare. Go down. These are again two more. One is the poster on the right. You see a poster of Pia Behrupia. I don't know if you've seen this, but this is an adaptation of Twelfth Night. And in case we have time, I would like to, screen a bit of it towards the end, if we still have time. It was performed at the Globe Theatre, and then it has been performing throughout the country. And on the left, you find a very old, I think it's from 1890s, a Bengali adaptation of Othello. It's a picture from that play, a performance. Okay. So let me begin. I've been asked to speak on Shakespeare and Indian theatre. Can someone keep time, Apurva or anyone else? And if I'm stretching it beyond everyone's patience, please let me know. I'll stop there and then, right? So I've been asked to speak on Shakespeare and Indian theatre. It's something that has been close to my academic and creative interests. So let me begin with a question. What is Shakespeare doing at Bhagat Singh College? Or in Ghaziabad or Meerut? Or for that matter, anywhere in India? There may be myriad answers to this question, ranging from Shakespeare was great to the role of colonialism, and so on and so forth. But for me, the simplest reason is Shakespeare still speaks to us and renders himself open to very many interpretations. Jean Cot, one of the great Shakespeare scholars and a Polish communist defector, had reminded us as late as the 1960s that Shakespeare was our contemporary. Isn't it surprising to see that the popularity of a school dropout, that's what he was, Shakespeare, isn't it surprising to see the popularity of a school dropout far exceeding that of his Oxbridge contemporaries, who had once called him an upstart crow? Now, tell me frankly, how many of us sitting here, except perhaps professors and UGC net enthusiasts, remember the university wits today? If I asked you, "Kaun kaun the? Satnam," I'm sure most of us would fail, right? I still remember because I was preparing for net exam at one point of time, and I had to cram all these names. But yes, not many of us. The irony is that we are still hooked to the upstart crow even after 600 years of his death. For me, his greatness lies in the fact that he is loved by friends and foes alike. Take, for instance, the Germans, the British rivals during the war, who refused to accept Shakespeare as a British playwright and appropriated him as a classical German dramatist instead. That notorious warmonger named Hitler was particularly inspired by Shakespeare's characterization of Jews, proving Jean Cot's claim right that every historical period found in Shakespeare what it was searching for. Such was the influence of his plays on the Weimar zeitgeist that the Hitler Youth organized Shakespeare Weeks in Germany throughout the 1930s. I'm sure that the Führer would have offered him a German citizenship were he alive, as he once famously did to the Indian hockey wizard Dhyan Chand. Even a country that once described Britain as its most dear enemy and whose high-headed hot Parisian named Voltaire had called Shakespeare a drunken savage and his plays grotesque, could not resist his talent and welcomed his plays with open arms. It took less than a century for the French public opinion to transform the bard from being a savage to one of the greatest geniuses of all time. Well, before the bard takes the better of me, let me move on to what I am here for. And I'm here to talk about Shakespeare in India, and I will do that. I'll explore Shakespeare through theatre. Shakespeare productions in India date back to the mid-18th century, when his plays were performed by the British officials and soldiers in the playhouses established by them in the cities like Calcutta and Bombay. In Calcutta, the Charangi Theatre and the Sans Souci Theatre, they were particularly known for their Shakespeare performances. It was at this Sans Souci Theatre that the controversial 1848 production of Othello that featured a native in the titular role was performed. It was for the first time that a native named Vaishnav Charan Adya performed in an all-English cast. The actor was, of course, cast for his color and not for his histrionic talents. In fact, by the 1830s, Indians had begun to perform Shakespeare. An assessment of these early Indian productions, largely in Calcutta and Bombay, reveals that these were either school and college productions that enacted select scenes from Shakespeare under the tutelage of their British teachers, or amateur productions by the Calcutta Bhadralok and the rich Bombay Seths. These early productions may be identified as imitative in nature, not in the Aristotelian sense of mimesis, but as servile copies of the English Shakespeare produced in India by the British during that time. There was no effort whatsoever to either adapt Shakespeare to the Indian cultural context or perform him in an Indian language. However, by the 1870s, Shakespeare was adapted in various Indian languages, including Gujarati, Urdu, and Bengali, among many others. While the earliest adaptation of a Shakespeare play in India was the 1852 Gujarati version of The Taming of the Shrew as Nathari Firangi Thikane Avi, a bad foreign woman brought to sense, the first Urdu adaptation of Shakespeare was Edalji Khori's Sone Ke Mool Ki Murshid in 1871, which was directed by Dadi Patel for the Victoria Theatrical Company. The earliest Bengali production of Shakespeare on the public stage was probably Comedy of Errors, done in 1873. Now, I find this phase, particularly from the 1870s till the 1920s, and that I refer to as the phase of indigenization, as one of the most productive and interesting periods for Shakespeare in India, especially since it helped in popularizing Shakespeare among the natives. Now, it's important to remember that the majority of Indians around that time could not read at all, let alone Shakespeare. Hence, theatre played a significant role in bringing Shakespeare closer to Indians. Another interesting phase for Shakespeare production has been the post-independence period, which saw a resurgence of his plays on the stage that included Utpal Dutt's Macbeth in 1954, and then Bhuli Nai Priya, which was Romeo and Juliet in 1970, B.V. Karam's Baranam 1, which is a 1989 production of Macbeth, done for National School of Drama, Habib Tanveer's Kamdev Ka Apna Vasant Ritu Ka Sapna, which is a Midsummer Night's Dream, 1993. Lokendro Arambam's Macbeth, Stage of Blood. It's a Manipuri production of Macbeth, done in 1997. And M.K. Raina's Badshah Pather, which is King Lear, in 2010. And these are just a few names. There are many more, that come to mind. However, for the purposes of this talk, I shall restrict myself to one adaptation each from these two periods, exploring India's theatrical engagement with the bard. And the plays are, the first one from the colonial period would be Aga Hashru Kashmiri's 1906 Urdu production of Urdu adaptation of King Lear as Sufed Khoon. And Sufed Khoon literally translates as unfilial blood. And the second one is Habib Tanveer's 1993 adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream as Kamdev Ka Apna, Vasant Ritu Ka Sapna. Born on the 3rd of April 1879, Aga Hashru Kashmiri went on to become one of the most prominent playwrights, poets, screenplay and songwriters in India. Has anyone heard about Aga Hashru Kashmiri? Yeah, I mean, the faculty perhaps has, but most of the students perhaps have not. Right. So he was one of the most prominent Urdu playwrights who was writing for the Parsi stage from 1890s onwards till the 1920s or so. And he was a successful poet, a screenplay writer, and a songwriter in India. Saadat Hasan Manto, who was a much younger contemporary of Aga Sahib, and who had met him on 2 occasions, writes about him. I think it's important that you know what was this person like, who was writing all these beautiful plays, and who was one of the most popular playwright and screenplay writers in India. And this is how Manto describes him in an essay called Aga Hashru Kashmiri Se Do Mulaqatein. And it's in Urdu, and I'll read it in Urdu. दारोगा इब्राहिम से जब मैंने आगा साहब के मुताल्लिक कुछ और पूछा तो उसने वही बातें बताई जो मैं औरों से 1000 मर्तबा सुन चुका था कि वो पहले दर्जे के अय्याश हैं, दिन रात शराब के नशे में धुत रहते हैं, बेहद गंदा जहन है, ऐसी ऐसी गालियां इजाद करते हैं कि मुगल जात में जिनकी कोई मिसाल नहीं मिलती. I mean, Mughal Zaat is basically abusive language or abuses. And ऐसी ऐसी गालियां ईजाद करते हैं that मुगल जात में जिनकी कोई मिसाल नहीं मिलती. बड़े से बड़े आदमी को भी खातिर में नहीं लाते. कंपनी के फला फला सेठ ने जब उनसे एक बार ड्रामे का तकाजा किया तो उन्होंने उसको इतनी मोटी गाली दी जो हमेशा के लिए उसके दिल में आगा साहब के खिलाफ नफरत पैदा करने के लिए काफी थी. लेकिन हैरत कि सेठ ने उफ न की और हाथ जोड़कर कहने लगा, आगा साहब हम आपके नौकर हैं. I mean, that was his stature. बदीहा गो थे. He was very spontaneous and witty. बदीहा गो थे. एक मर्तबा रिहर्सल हो रही थी. गर्मी के बाईस एक एक्ट्रेस बार बार माथे पर से उंगली के साथ पसीना पहुंच रही थी. आगा साहब झुंझलाए और एक शेर मौजू हो गया. अबरू न संवारा करो कट जाएगी उंगली, नादान हो तलवार से खेला नहीं करते हैं. That was not his own शेर, by the way. This is by Aga Shair Khazalbash. But he remembered it and he said that अबरू न संवारा करो कट जाएगी उंगली, नादान हो तलवार से खेला नहीं करते. About his writing process, Manto writes, and this is about Aga Sahab. Aga Sahab मुंशियों को हुक्म देते थे. So he would have several munshis who were writing. I mean, Aga Sahab was too big to write himself. So he would order, he would dictate, and people would be writing his plays. So आगा साहब मुंशियों को हुक्म देते थे कि तैयार हो जाओ, और शराब पीकर टहलते टहलते बैक वक्त कॉमेडी और ट्रेजेडी लिखवाना शुरू कर देते थे. So that was his process. Aga Ashra Kashmiri was barely 18 when he had already written his first play, Aftab-e-Muhabbat, and that too in a week's time. It is said to have sold 1,000 copies in perhaps 1890s. He was not even 20 when he moved to Bombay in 1898 with the hope to become a playwright, since Parsi theatre had already established drama as one of the most popular forms of entertainment. His first employment was with Kawasji Palanji Khatao's Alfred Natak Mandali, for which he wrote Murid-e-Shak in 1899, and that's an adaptation of The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale. He went on to write about 30 plays covering a vast array of themes and genres, including historical, social, mythological, romantic dramas, in addition to adapting Shakespeare in Urdu. Written primarily during the early phase of his career between 1898 and 1908, these loose adaptations include Murid-e-Shak, which is The Winter's Tale, Dil-Farosh, Merchant of Venice in 1900, Shaheed-e-Naz urf Daman-e-Husn urf Achuta Daman, which is Measure for Measure, 1902, Said-e-Havas, Richard III, 1906, Sufayad Khoon, which is an adaptation of King Lear, 1906, Khwab-e-Hasti, Macbeth, 1908, Khubsurat Bala, Macbeth, 1909, Bazm-e-Fani, Romeo and Juliet. In a writing that spanned over 3 decades, Harsha wrote for a variety of Parsi theatrical companies. In fact, he himself established three theatrical companies, 2 of which were named after the bard. The first one was Indian Shakespeare Theatrical Company of Lahore, and the other one was the Great Shakespeare Theatrical Company of Calcutta. Unfortunately, and those who know Aga Ashra Kashmiri, jinhone thoda padha hai, they won't find it surprising that none of these companies met with any success, and both had to be closed. Once Parsi theatre succumbed to the talkies, Harsh then moved to the Bombay film industry, where he contributed to the success of such films like Yehudi Ki Ladki, 1933, Shiri Farhad, 1931, Aurat Ka Pyar, 1933, and Jawani Ka Nasha, 1935, as a successful screenplay and songwriter. Harsha's Sufayad Khoon, now coming to this particular adaptation that I'm talking about, Sufayad Khoon, is a cultural adaptation of Shakespeare's King Lear and presents a good example of assimilating Shakespeare in the collective Indian memory. Harsha did not aim at a linguistic translation of Shakespeare, but a cultural adaptation in the Indian context. And it's a lesson for all those who want to translate Shakespeare. I mean, don't even dare translating Shakespeare literally. I mean, there's no fun. I mean, read Range Raghav text. Range Raghav translated almost all the texts of all the plays of Shakespeare into Hindi. They're very bad translations, I must say. So if you plan to translate Shakespeare, I mean, never try to do a linguistic translation. And Harsha did not do that at all. Now, this impulse to assimilate Shakespeare was guided by the fact that Harsha, like Shakespeare, was not writing for the classroom, but for the stage, whose audience were not even bothered if the play was an original play or a Shakespearean adaptation. In his adaptation, Harsha does not leave any trace of Englishness intact. The characters, locales, stories, costumes, and form, everything is indigenized. Following the convention of Parsi theatre, Sufayad Khoon has 2 mutually exclusive sets of characters. On the one hand, there are main characters, and the characters are Hakan. Hakan is the Badshah, and Hakan is King Lear. Arsalan is the Earl of Kent. Saadan is Earl of Gloucester. Bayram is Edmund. Parvez is Edgar. Mahpara is Gondrel. Dilara is Regan. And Zara is Cordelia. On the other hand, there are comic characters: Guldam, Gulkhairo, Turram, Jalil, Baglol, Kadak, Phadak, and Laila. Now, all of these characters do not exist in Shakespeare, right? So it's out of his own imagination that he invents these comic characters. Now, while Safed Khoon does not have a fool, that's important for Shakespeare, an important dramatic function of a fool, which is comic relief, is provided by these characters in what were called the comic scenes. So if you read an Aga Ashra play, you will find a comic scene. It'll be written a comic scene. Though such comic scenes did not have any direct bearing on the plot, yet they played an important role besides providing comic relief. To understand this, one needs to pay attention to the mise en scène in Parsi theatre, which involved staging of two types of scenes. One was a deep scene and the other was a shallow scene. While the deep scene were reserved for the deeper recesses of the stage and they presented serious action, the shallow scenes, they were staged downstage, closer to the audience, and they presented comic or less serious actions. The comic scenes, with a painted curtain depicting commonplaces behind, provided the required time that was, the time that was required to prepare the deep scenes at the back that comprise the main action of the play. So it was a strategy, right? You would need time to prepare, to change the set, and so on and so forth. So that is happening, and they have drawn a curtain in the middle of the theater, of the stage, and in front of it is, a comic scene being performed. So Fair School is no exception to this formula and features at least 3 comic scenes, independent of the main plot, successfully fulfilling their dramatic action. Now, such comic scenes in the later years became an indispensable part of Parsi theatre, and almost every playwright included such comic scenes in their plays. Another important change that Harsha introduced in his Shakespearean adaptation was to reduce the Shakespearean 5-act structure to a 3-act one. Now, my contention is that the reduction of the Shakespearean 5 acts to 3 was influenced by the performance conditions of Parsi theatre. Songs were an integral part of Parsi theatre, and some were even accompanied by dance sequences. Moreover, it was common for the audience to shout for encores, which resulted in repeating songs and scenes to please the audience. Now, one can imagine the amount of time it must have taken for a 5-act play to be performed under such performance conditions. Following the conventions of classical and traditional Indian theatres, Harsha made another structural change to the original by opening it with what is called a hamd. A hamd is an invocation to the gods, which is followed by a doha, and then there is a chorus, and then there is a song which praises the Lord, and there's a celebration of spring season. So, I mean, the first 2 or 3 pages, if you read of Sufai's Khoon, which is King Lear, you will only have Nach Gana, if nothing else. There's not even a single dialogue. It's only song and dance and chorus and doha and so on and so forth. The Urdu productions later on, the Hindi ones too, in Parsi theatre employed considerable poetry as it gave an opportunity for declamation and blood and thunder speech, which was much appreciated by the audience. In fact, it had become an established convention in Parsi theatre that actors would leave their poetic dialogues incomplete only to be completed by the audience in chorus. While this increased the dramatic effect of the speech, it also ensured audience participation and engagement with the performance. A typical Urdu adaptation of Shakespeare would entail the Elizabethan blank verse was transferred, into shares and ghazals and rhythmic prose to make it more poetic. Now, since Harsha was an accomplished poet himself, it only helped him become an incomparable playwright of Parsi theatre. To give you an example of his poetic genius, let me quote the opening speech of Khakan, that's King Lear in Urdu. If you go to this is Lear's opening speech, and there's another one. When I'm speaking, you can then move on to this, right? So this is the opening speech of King Lear in Angrezi. English mein wo ye bolte hain. And here is a Khakan, the Indian Lear, which utters the same speech in chaste Urdu. And this goes something like, "E baise hayate jahan bani, e ruhe rawani sultani, बरसों सैरे जहाने फानी देखी, हर चीज यहाँ की आनी जानी देखी, जो आके न जाए वो बुढ़ापा देखा, जो जाके न आए वो जवानी देखी, अंदेशा ये मर्ग व खौफ फरसुरदा ने घेरा है, थोड़े ही अरसे में मेरी शाम जिंदगी का सवेरा है, लिहाजा चाहता हूं कि वफात से पहले हयात का एक बड़ा फर्ज है वो चुकाया जाए, यानी नाइत्तफाकी के हाथों से बचाकर ये ताज किसी हकदार के सर चढ़ाया जाए। सबसे पहले हमारे ज़ईफ कान ये सुनना चाहते हैं कि तुम में से हर एक बेटी मुझे किस कदर प्यार करती है। महपारा, तुम औलादे अकबर हो, यू आर द सीनियर वन, अव्वल तुम ही से सुने तुम्हारी सादतमंदी क्या इजहार करती है। A comparison of these speeches will reveal that Hush does not make any change in the original. I mean, the intent remains same. Uh, where Khakan is expressing, or Lear is expressing, his desire to divide his kingdom by running a love test on his daughters. He asks the oldest one, Mahpara, who's Gonril, to be the first to express her love for the Sultan, who gives a Gonril like response, even in this play. Mahapara says, जहां पना अगर ये अम्र सच है कि समंदर का पानी खूजे में नहीं समा सकता, तो इसे भी सच जानिए कि आपकी लाइंतहा मोहब्बत का इजहार जुबान और कलाम के जरिए से नहीं हो सकता. मेरी गोयाई इससे ज्यादा और कुछ नहीं कह सकती कि जितनी मोहब्बत इस खादिमा को आपसे है, इतनी कोई बेटी अपने बाप से न रखती थी और न रखती है. Even the younger daughter of Khakan, Dilara, echoes the sentiments of Regan and declares her love for Khakan in the superlatives. Zara, on the other hand, speaks the truth like Cordelia. However, instead of Cordelia's mere nothing, my lord, I mean, she only says nothing, my lord, in King Lear, Hush makes Zara respond poetically in the following words. Zara says, Abba Jan, मैं क्या अर्ज करूं? इतात मुझसे कहती है कि तू चुप रह नहीं सकती, मगर मेरा ये कहना है कि मैं कुछ कह नहीं सकती. Her reply is followed by a song, Kar Gaur Gar Hai Dana, philosophizing the need to think wisely before iterating. A debate then ensues between Khakan and Zara, establishing her Cordelia-like character quite firmly. The plot and the subplot more or less follow the original play, except a few episodes and comic scenes, which are Hashra's own imagination. Now, I've told you that songs were integral to Parsi theatre, and it helped in making Parsi theatre a successful industry. It was important for actors to have knowledge of singing, since there was no provision for background singing. Since songs also played the role of dialogues at many places in a play, it was important that the songs were set to such tunes that the audience could easily understand its words and could sing along. Even fighting heroes and dying heroines in Parsi theatre would sing. It is interesting to note that Kashmiri had also acquainted himself with a few Hindustani ragas at the behest of a poet friend so as to succeed in playwriting. Sufad Khun also features a number of songs, at least 22. Some are sung by the chorus, while others by various dramatis personae. In fact, almost everyone in the play sings, ranging from Geet to a ghazal to thumri, and so on. I can just point out one where Arsalan in Act 1, Scene 2, who's the Kent, he starts with a Geet and then moves into a ghazal. And the ghazal is, ताज्जुब ठोकरों में क्यों सरे फगफूर होता है it must be there. Oh yes, Arslan. ताज्जुब ठोकरों में क्यों सरे फगफूर होता है, गुरूर जोर ज़र इस घर से यूं ही दूर होता है, जवानी में अदम के वास्ते सामान कर गाफिल, मुसाफिर शब से उठते हैं जो जाना दूर होता है, हमारी जिंदगानी हश्र मिट्टी का खिलौना है, अजल की एक ठोकर से जो चकनाचूर होता है. Another important aspect of Shakespeare adaptation in Parsi theatre was transforming tragedies into happy endings. Now, this might have been the influence of classical and traditional theatres of India, which never entertained a tragedy, except Bhas. But Bhas is an exception. I won't go to Bhas now. But Hashra too ends Sufed Khun happily, with Zara and Khakan uniting and the king reiterating the unfilial deeds of Mahapara, Jahanara, and Bairam, that's Edmund, in the following verse. Zohak na Firaun na Shaddad ne kiya, jo tujh par aur mujh par meri aulad ne kiya. सीने में हो गया है दिले ना उम्मीद खून, देखा तो क्या सुना भी नहीं ऐसा सफेद खून. And then the play finally ends with Khakan blessing Zara and her husband, and the entire court joins in the nuptial celebrations, and there is song and dance, and that's how the play ends. Now, do I still have more time? Okay. So this brings me to the second production. If you're already not bored, I may continue. If you are, please let me know. So this is Habib Tanveer's. I'll be brief about this. I would rather prefer you to watch something than listen to me. Now, this is Habib Tanveer's adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream as Kamdev Ka Apna Vasant Ritu Ka Sapna. It's a strange sounding title, but yes, it's one of the more successful plays of Habib Tanveer. Now, while both adaptations, whether Sufed Khun or Vasant Ritu, I'll refer to this as Vasant Ritu, uh, in short. So while both these adaptations are highly localized and they use folk and traditional forms, there is but one difference, and this difference is ideological. While most popular theatres in pre-independence India adapted Shakespeare to earn profits and hence did not bother too much about the Shakespeare text, much of the post-colonial Shakespeare adaptations, they were guided by an impulse to decolonize theatre. And they also paid more attention to the nuances of the old text. Christie Desmet in Shakespeare and Appropriation, she describes the process of adapting Shakespeare by post-colonial societies as one, and I quote her, in which post-colonial societies take over those aspects of imperial culture that may be of use to them in articulating their own social and cultural identities, end quote. And Vasant Ritu exemplifies this approach pretty well. Habib Tanveer, the playwright and the director of Vasant Ritu, belonged to the elder generation of theatre directors in post-independence India. His theatre drew a great deal from Indian folk performances, especially the traditional performance of Chhattisgarh. Tanveer's theatre needs to be located in the discourse of decolonizing theatre in post-colonial India. His theatre ensemble, which he named Naya Theatre, was the culmination of his long cherished desire to create a new kind of theatre that is steeped in the rich cultural heritage of India. Among myriad influences on Tanveer, the German playwright and director Bertolt Brecht perhaps influenced him the most. By his own admission, it was after experiencing Brecht's theatre in Germany in the 1950s that he realized, and I quote him, "It is only if one works with one's own cultural traditions and ethos that one can achieve something more durable, more innovative, and artistically more interesting." End quote. He also suggested that one can do nothing worthwhile. And I'm quoting him: one can do nothing worthwhile unless you went to your roots and tried to reinterpret traditions and used traditions as a vehicle for transmitting the most modern and contemporary messages. Now, if you look at Tanveer's theatre, it has been like this. It has been guided by this impulse to interpret tradition in a modern day world, right? And believe me, those of you who know Habib Sahib, you dare call him that आप folk theatre कर रहे हैं, he would slap you in your face. He has done that, right? नाटक चल रहा है, एक्टर ने कुछ खराब किया, वो चढ़ जाते थे स्टेज पे कि तुम गलत कर रहे हो, and yet to be brought back. सर वापस आइए, नाटक चल रहा है, right? He was a no nonsense man, right? So don't think that what he's doing, and he says, I'm not doing folk theatre, I'm working with folk actors, but my theatre is very modern. It has a modern sensibility to it. It's very refined. It's not folk, right? Tanveer's approach is best exemplified in productions that have become synonymous with his theatre. That includes Gaon Ka Naam Sasural, Mor Naam Damad. That's one of his first plays with which he broke. That was his eureka moment when he realized, oh, this is the kind of theatre I have been wanting to do, right? And it's called Gaon Ka Naam Sasural, Mor Naam Damad. The village is the in-law's house, and I am the son-in-law. Then the second one is Bhav Bhuti's Uttar Ramcharit that he performed with his Chhattisgarhi actors. And these are folk actors, many of whom don't even know how to read a script. All right. The most celebrated one, Charandas Chor, Charandas the Thief, in 1975-76. Then Shudrak's Mrichkatik, which he performed with his Chhattisgarhi actors in Chhattisgarhi as Mitti Ki Gadi, 1977-78. And the last one, Kamdev Ka Apna, Vasant Ritu Ka Sapna, 1993. Now, this particular adaptation or translation was Tanveer's first attempt at producing a Shakespeare play. In fact, Tanveer had always wanted to do a Shakespeare play, but he admitted that he never liked the translations in Hindi and Urdu, and it was not wrong. Moreover, he did not try translating the Bard himself, for he found it intimidating. I'm sure many of us are intimidated by the very thought of translating Shakespeare into an Indian language. Either we are too literal, or we just leave it, in between that. Humse nahi hoga, right? It so happened that the English Shakespeare Company offered Tanveer a project to direct a Shakespeare play in collaboration with the English actors of the company and his own folk performers. Tanveer found A Midsummer Night's Dream to be an apt play for a bilingual production and saw the possibility of different languages being spoken by different characters in the play. The strategy that he devised was simple. The royalty would speak English, the inhabitants of the forest and fairies would speak Urdu, while the mechanicals would converse in their dialect, that is Chhattisgarhi. Once Tanveer was sure about how to use these languages, he started translating the play. He focused on only one plot and tried to be close to the original text. However, there were various problems. The English title, for instance, was problematic. How do you translate A Midsummer Night's Dream in India? As he acknowledged that while midsummer is an occasion for festivity in Britain and elsewhere in the West, midsummer in tropical countries does not exactly stand for cheerful occasions. I mean, it's not the English summer. As a kid, I would think, why are they so crazy about summer? I had only seen Indian summer, which was pathetic. Similarly, Kamdev, the god of love and desire, in Hindu mythology replaces the Western Cupid, who may be unfamiliar to many Indians. Now, Tanveer decided to retain the original names of the characters and places, but change the names of the flora and fauna, the fairies and the gods. The fairies are referred to as Pari. Uh, his translation is very few translations or versions of Shakespeare in Indian languages, which translates blank verse into blank verse, rhymed verse into rhymed, and prose into prose. Like Parsi theatre, music has always played an important role in Tanveer's plays, since most of them are rooted in folk stories and folk theatres. Even Vasant Ritu has introduced songs based on ghazals, tumris, and songs from the Nautanki tradition from North India. Theseus, for example, sings a ghazal. Can you go forward? Yeah, it's a ghazal. I mean, this is my translation, but the original translation, the original ghazal that he uses is when Theseus says, वो नीम शब की आहनी ज़बां की जुम्बिशें सुनो जो बार बार दे रही हैं आधी रात की खबर गुजर गया है वक्त शाम इस अजीब खेल में हर रात है रात जाग देर तक तो होगी जल्दी ही सहर. While Puck in Act 2, Scene 1 depicts the situation, the king doth keep his revels here tonight, in poetry, like a typical chaubola in the North Indian form of Nautanki. Puck says, बन का राजा बन की रानी से है बहुत नाराज कह दे अपनी रानी से वो इधर न फटके आज तेरी रानी ये भी तू सुन ले बन के राजा आता है लेकर सब सेवक अपने. I mean, this is how he does it. Now, some modifications are necessary when translating a text from one culture to another, but Tanveer believes that his play is pretty close in terms of its spirit to A Midsummer Night's Dream. The proposed project by the English company got postponed due to financial constraints, unfortunately or fortunately. So Tanveer decided that he will still carry on with the play, but he'll chuck out English now. So if you now read the script, it doesn't have the English part. So it only concentrates with the mechanicals, right? Only that bit. The rustic mechanicals planning to stage a play on the occasion of the royal wedding of Theseus. And the denizens of fairy world were played by urban actors and the mechanicals by the folk artists of Tanveer's group. Now, his theatre has always been a theatre of austerity. It is no surprise because it comes from the folk theatres that he acquired the simplicity and lucidity of that folk theatre. And this is true for Kamdev as well. If you, I'll show you one or two pieces from the production. You realize that there's literally nothing on the stage. Literally nothing, just a bare platform. If you, how many of you have seen Charandas Chor? Some of you might have. If not, the entire play has at least 6 settings, but throughout the play there's no change of set because there is no set. There is only one platform, 6 by 12 feet wide platform, and just that. And there's a single branch, a tree at the background, which is basically a branch, and there's nothing else throughout the play. But he changes the setting with his actors every now and then. The space is transformed into a palace and then an ashram and then a royal treasury without any physical change whatsoever. It's only by the positioning of the actors that this place has changed. Now, Sudhanva Deshpande talks about his theatre and his austerity. He says, with its simplicity, its directness, and minimalism, Habib Tanvir's theatre would have been considered avant-garde had it not been so popular and so funny. To conclude, I would just say, while a Shakespeare purist, and that mostly includes English professors, including me, might see these adaptations as bastardizing the bard. Yet, such productions have been the hallmark of Indian theatre since colonial times. What else explains the failure of Girish Ghoshal's 1893 Macbeth that was played straight in Bengali, despite the fact that he was the most successful Bengali director of his times? Or Utpal Dutt's decision to move from the English Shakespeare on the Calcutta stage to Shakespeare in the Bengali folk form of Jatra in post-colonial India of the 1970s. There are examples galore to prove my contention. Another point that I would like to add here is that while such productions that you've seen may not have created a counter discourse by subverting the English text, as Derek Walcott and M.S. Caesar have done with The Tempest, yet they illustrate the appropriation of the master text and the Shakespeare performance in their own ways. To borrow from Helen Gilbert and John Tompkins, these productions present a syncretic combination of indigenous and colonial forms in the post-colonial world. They have adapted Shakespeare to develop theatrical styles by blending elements of traditional and folk forms, Sanskrit theatre, and modern theatre. Thus, such productions go beyond the fixed categories of the colonial and the post-colonial and open up the possibilities of a more nuanced discourse on theatrical expressivity. Thank you. I end my talk here. Thank you. There's a, do we have time for screening a little? How much time do we have? Which one? So I can skip Pia Behrupia. Okay. These are 3 minutes each. There are 2 or 3 scenes, and then there is one we can begin and then we can stop. The first one is. It doesn't matter. You can begin any. It actually doesn't matter. If you have play within the play. Yeah. Is it connected to sound? Yeah. This is Habib Tanvir's play. Can you go to the That's the Flog by the Lion. Yeah, you can stop. And go to the last. No, this is fine. So I'll very briefly play Pia Behrupia. If you've seen it, fine. If you've not seen it, I can just play the trailer. I mean, you can watch the entire. It's available, I think, on Z5 or somewhere. So you can play this first. And this is the Globe Theatre when they went to the Globe Theatre to perform. Now, why this is important is this is neither by Habib Tanveer nor by Agasha Kashmiri, but this is also a culmination of these styles. So Atul, who directed the play, has been influenced by the Nautanki tradition, by Habib Tanveer's theatre, by the Parsi theatres, and he has created an amalgamation of all of this that you find in this particular production. So this is just a trailer of this. So Amitosh is the writer for the play. Okay, so that's it from my side. Thank you very much once again.
Your riveting talk about Shakespeare and Indian theatre made the Shakespearean world around us tangible and intelligible. We cannot thank you enough for these insightful thoughts, sir. And I'm sure all of us present here found the facts about Indian translations, namely, Parsi translations, and how they continue to include their culture and traditions into into their remakes of these plays while maintaining the essence of it. Quite interesting. So, thank you so much for all that. So,
If there's any question or any
yeah,
Yeah,
just about to
we were
raise.
just about to announce that. Now, with the permission of our esteemed speaker, we would like to open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. We request the audience to share their valuable thoughts and responses. I would like to invite our classmate Vaishnavi Mishra to help us gather thoughts and responses for our esteemed speaker.
Thank you, Ritika. And thank you, Dr. Thakur, for such a wonderful talk and introducing us to Aga Saab and Tanveer Habib Saab. Whoever wishes to ask questions or make any comments, please raise your hands and I'll come to you and hand over the mic. Yeah.
First, let me take this opportunity I have two questions, quick questions. One is this, in the post-colonial scenario of especially this, from the Edward side in terms or otherwise, how do we look at these adaptations and what are the challenges, ideological and linguistic challenges, which these plays, when they were screened in India, are prepared and rendered in India, the renditions, what are the challenges they were facing from the intellectual, this lobbying of this post-colonial thinkers, number one.
Can I answer this question first?
Yeah, please.
Because I'll give you a very interesting. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. How many of you know Utpal Dutt? I'm sure some of you have heard about Utpal Dutt, right? The senior faculty, perhaps, yes. Utpal Dutt say exactly, this kind of a question was posed, and not about Shakespeare, but generally about theater. And he said he made a very interesting observation, and I love it. I lapped it up and I use it anywhere and everywhere I go. He says, Hindustan में एक बहुत खतरनाक चीज है जो हो रही है. And that, he's speaking in 1960s, 70s, that we are trying to intellectualize theater. We don't need to intellectualize theater. Let theater be theater, right? So as far as,
Excuse me, can you all just be seated?
Go back to your seats. It's not over yet. Sorry.
no, that's all right.
Please be seated. Don't leave the hall.
Right. So, I think if you look at, it's a question which is very important, and I think I try to hint at it towards the end of my talk, where I refer to a particular production, 1893 production of Girish Ghosh's Macbeth. Now, if you look at that particular production of Macbeth, it was in Bengali, and Girish Ghosh had a reputation of being one of the most successful, Bengali theater directors, but the production fell badly. Like after 10 productions, it had to be taken out. And the reason precisely was this, that he was perhaps trying to intellectualize Shakespeare on a popular stage, which did not work very well. So he did not have any songs, let's say. He played Shakespeare pretty straight. The locale was Scotland. The names were foreign. Everything was foreign about his Macbeth, except that it was being performed in Bangla. The audience didn't get anything. And later on, Girish Ghosh writes a letter to his friends and he says, these Indians, they don't understand Shakespeare. Huh? All they want is Nach and Gana, right? Here I am an intellectual trying to, give them what Shakespeare is, and there's no response. They don't enjoy that kind of. So what I'm trying to say is this: Shakespeare's presence in India largely has been marked by such popular productions, and that has really paved the way for popularizing Shakespeare in India, as against intellectuals like us, who would pick up a Shakespeare play, class mein padhana hai. I mean, of course, we'll teach Shakespeare in a classroom setting. There's no other way to it, perhaps. But Shakespeare was not writing for classroom. He was writing for popular theaters. And we have tried to intellectualize Shakespeare also. हर साल 250 किताबें Shakespeare पे आती हैं पिछले 600 साल से. Right? We're trying to intellectualize him. Now, but Pia Behrupia doesn't do that. Or Habib Tanveer doesn't do that. They are not even bothered by, especially Parsi theatre wasn't even bothered about the stature of Shakespeare. कि Shakespeare एक महान नाटककार है and we are bothered by his status and कैसे करेंगे कैसे नहीं. It's like a Bollywood film. In fact, there's a Anglo-British novelist, forgetting his name, who said that had Shakespeare been alive today, he would have been writing for Bollywood. Right. Natak, most of hai hi Bollywood, Sara. Yes. The second question, Professor. Sorry.
Perfectly fine. It's an extension of the first one, of course. The reception of these particular plays when they were rendered in India, the regional sensibilities, how far they were accommodated in the Shakespearean thing, be it Gujarati or
To give you
Bengali.
an example, the balcony scene is a big no-no. I mean, you can't see, let's say, a kiss. You can't have a kiss on the stage. तो सबसे मजेदार चीज होती थी कि एक गजल डाल दो. मोहब्बत दिखानी है तो गजल डाल दो. And that has been the trend. If you read Shakespeare in Urdu or in various other languages, they would not do a literal sort of a translation, but a stage adaptation. They can't show. It's like, एक गजल डाल दिया, गीत डाल दिया, तो वो सब हो गया. Because you could not offend that, right? So most of these productions. Similarly, I mean, I told you in Parsi theatre, so I mean, a tragedy was a big no-no. You can't have a tragedy. So King Lear bhi ends on a very positive note where Cordelia and Lear, they are united, right? Because you could not offend your audience. The audience won't like the fact that heroine mar gayi. में 10 साल पहले तक हीरोइन हीरो नहीं मरते थे. I mean, we could not the fact the hero is dying. We needed heroes who survive. So of course, I mean, there were adjustments that were made, and yeah, it's so we've seen that adjustments being made.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Since drama is a collaborative medium, so do you think that Shakespeare also collaborated with other writers while writing his plays?
There are several conspiracy theories. Shakespeare था भी या नहीं? Shakespeare औरत थी, आदमी था. Whether Shakespeare collaborated, I mean, I don't know, but yes, what has come down to us is also perhaps a lot of this has got to do with the editors. We don't know what exactly Shakespeare wrote, actually. If you look at Quarto, you look at Folio, a few lines missing here, a few lines added there, and there is possibility. I mean, the globe was on fire. We don't know कौन सा text हमारे पास पहुंचा exactly. So there is a possibility, and as I'm saying that it's a collaborative art, and more so back then, where because Shakespeare was not writing in isolation. Shakespeare was not an intellectual. वो Oxford, Cambridge में नहीं था कि वो बैठ के नाटक लिख रहा है, फिर भेज रहा है नाटक, and then his plays are being performed. He was with the company. Like Aga Harsha Kashmiri was with the company. He was commissioned to write a play. So there is every possibility that actors adding lines to it. So for instance, Habib Tanveer says it very well in, when he was working with his actors. So that's what he would do. He would not write a script first, right? What he would do he would give a situation, and the actors would try to create a situation out of it. And then this sort of an ensemble writing takes place. Similarly, with a very wonderful production, if you get a chance, you must see it. It's, I think, available on YouTube. It's called बादशाह पाथेर, done by M.K. Raina. 2010 में किया था, इसके बाद होता आया है. So it's with a folk form from Kashmir, which is Bhand Pather. So he performed King Lear in Bhand Pather. Now when he went with the Ford Foundation का fellowship that कुछ करना है Kashmir में with a folk form. So he went there very smartly, and I was talking with M.K. Raina, and M.K. said, "Yeah, I went there very smartly with the script in hand. ये नाटक है, हमें ये perform करना है with these performers." And they reacted, in a manner that he had not expected, because he realized that many of these people can't even read. And the script was Harivansh Rai Bachchan's translation of Lear. He says, एक तो हिंदी, ऊपर से इनको पढ़ना नहीं आता, right? So मतलब सब वो सपना टूट गया. But then foundation का पैसा था, कुछ करना था, right? So what he did was, he created this play there. He gave them the basic of King Lear. अच्छा King Lear ये है, ये situation है. Now you create scenes. Now the scenes were written there collaboratively in their own language, and that's how it was produced. So I'm sure there might have been a possibility that Shakespeare collaborated, but there's no credible sort of an evidence.
So the second question is that how do you look at Vishal Bharadwaj's cinematic adaptation of his plays, and especially because they're not just critically acclaimed, but they're also commercially viable. Look at Makbul, Omkara, Heather for that matter. So how do you look at this kind of adaptation then?
I am not sure. I don't think I'm qualified enough to answer this, because A, I'm not a film scholar. I do not understand film at all, and it's not my medium. I haven't even seen all the adaptations by. But what I see, what I feel good about Bharadwaj is that he doesn't let the spirit, Shakespearean spirit in these texts fade away. So he's not superimposing himself. B, because it is commercial, it is bound to be entertaining. And for me, no theater or no drama is good if it is not entertaining. So चाहे वो उसमें गजल है, गाना है, situations हैं, comedy है, whatever that be, that is important. And he's close to Shakespearean spirit. I mean, if you look at all these scripts, all these plays. But if you ask me, I can just say it's lovely, it's wonderful. But I cannot critically. I don't think I'm qualified enough to talk about this particular scene or particular sort of camera work. I don't do films, so yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
But if you're willing, there's a book called Bollywood Shakespeare's, in which I had also contributed. You may find your answer there. It's about films.
Thank you for the talk, sir. Yeah. Right. Thank you for the talk. Like my colleagues who've questioned you previously, I too have two questions. My first question is about the poetic sensibilities of Urdu and its interaction with Shakespeare's dramatic productions. Now, the way I see it, Urdu has had certain stock images, stock themes that it borrows from Persian, love, loss, and tragedy, and all of that. Could you say something about the poetic sensibilities of Urdu and Shakespeare's poetic sensibilities and in the interaction between the two? So how have Shakespeare's sensibilities been accommodated through traditional forms of poetry in Urdu? That's number one. Number two, again, Urdu, like Persian, has had no significant tradition of theatre. Now, since Shakespeare has been adapted in Urdu, is there some influence of Shakespeare's theatre that continues to influence Urdu theatre presently, or has it had a formative effect in the constitution of Urdu theatre?
To answer your second question first, perhaps, even if you ask, I'm pretty sure about it, if you go to a department and ask Bhagat Kashmiri ke baare mein, people won't even know. Even those who are working or Urdu scholars, they are not even bothered by who Bhagat Kashmiri is, because they never take him seriously. They think natak stage ke liye zyada kuch hai, right? And I'm telling you, hundreds of such plays written in Urdu. So whether it is Agasha Kashmiri, whether it is Narayan Prasad Betab, or many others before Agash as well. There are many. They have never been given significant attention, academic attention, right? So while they have influenced Bollywood films, now remember, one has to keep in mind that 1920s, the Parsi theatre was a huge hit, and then comes the talkies to Bombay. And Parsi theatre was completely stalled. Now, these are Parsi, the Parsi community, a thriving Parsi community who were entrepreneurs. They all moved, the owners of these theatrical companies moved to Bollywood, to cinema. And all of these Parsi theatre playwrights and actors moved to the film industry, right? So it did impact film industry a great deal. In fact, if you, there's a play by Sohrab Modi. It was an Urdu adaptation of Hamlet, Khoon Ka Khoon, which was done in Urdu for the Parsi stage. And then comes the talkies. Then this stage adaptation was filmed on the stage and passed off as a film. Ye film hai. Right. So the early cinema, if you look at it, it was hugely influenced by Parsi tradition, Parsi Shakespeare and other Parsi mythological plays as well. To answer your the first question that you asked about Urdu poetry, let me look at it from the performance point of view. Now, the biggest question is, and it's a good question, कि Urdu का अपना theatrical tradition उतना है नहीं. Then why it is Urdu? You know, why Parsi theatre becomes synonymous with Urdu, let's say. And you have to go back in history. Amanat is the first guy who writes Indar Sabha. That is the first Urdu play, right? And this happens because Amanat was perhaps commissioned by Wajid Ali Shah. Now, Wajid Ali Shah, being Wajid Ali Shah, could have done that. वो तो खुद कथक करते थे, वो खुद रास करते थे, वो खुद नाटक खेलते थे, right? So he commissioned someone to write a play in Urdu, and it was called Indar Sabha, right? It's well documented. I think you will also get the script somewhere. Which was not liked by many, especially आसपास के लोगों को. Bhartendu Harishchandra had a lot of problem. Harishchandra had a lot of problem with Indar Sabha, and he wrote a parody of Indar Sabha and called it Bandar Sabha, which was performed with his company, with his theatrical company, because they were बकवास करते हैं Parsi theatre वाले, कोई morality नहीं है, वो कहीं से भी औरतों को उठा के उनसे गाने गवा देते हैं, नाच नचवा देते हैं. Right, all of that, because all of these women who were coming on the Parsi stage were not from the respectable families, right? Now, Urdu, in a sense, if you look at this language issue, Parsi theatre actually begins with English. Young Parsi gentlemen in Bombay, Elphinstone के graduates, thinking, चलो Shakespeare करते हैं, अंग्रेजी teachers से पढ़े थे. So they would perform, and soon they realized that this could be a viable industry, and they started performing in Gujarati, which was their first language. After having performed it for like 10 years in Gujarati, they realized we need to make it more business friendly, and that's when they adapted Hindustani and Urdu as a language. And that's why Urdu became very important from the commercial perspective. And also another reason for Urdu was, during this time, there were problems emerging even from the Parsi community regarding morality of these plays, right? And they thought कि अगर उर्दू का गजल डाल दिया जाए, क्योंकि उर्दू का जो ट्रेडिशन है वो बहुत क्लासिकल है, कि गालिब भी हैं, मीर भी हैं, ये भी है, वो उर्दू renders itself more respectable as a language, and that's why they deliberately started doing that initially, right? I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but perhaps, I don't know. I mean, if it, sure. So sorry. Yeah.
Hello, sir. Sir, I think this topic has already been touched with films and so on. So you mentioned in the beginning of the talk, you quoted a scholar. You said that every time and culture has found something in themselves, for themselves in Shakespeare.
Yeah, Jean Cot.
So, yeah. So what do we as post-globalization culture, the boundary of culture is over.
What you can find in
Yeah,
Shakespeare.
what do we find in Shakespeare?
That is up to you to find something in Shakespeare.
I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about it?
For me, I mean, my love is Shakespeare. His dramatic action, his dramatic situation, his range of thoughts is something that I really adore. It's like, I shouldn't be comparing him to the classical music because he was popular, but the range that he deals with is immense. I mean, it's really difficult for, हमें एक कहानी लिखनी होती है तो ऐसी की तैसी हो जाती है. Right? And here is a man who's writing some 37 plays and all of them dealing with different emotions. That is something that really interests me. Now, one can always say that, Shakespeare is universal. Shakespeare talks about human values and so on and so forth. And you can also critique that. That's fair enough. But it's perhaps, and interestingly, I'll tell you, when we talk about post-colonial Shakespeare, if you look at, we talk about Tempest, a post-colonial reading of the Tempest, a post-colonial reading of Othello or Macbeth, and so on and so forth. When it comes to the stage is still untouched by these discourses. So you'll not find a post-colonial, in India, I'm talking about India and the popular theatres, you'll not find a post-colonial sort of a production of Shakespeare where you are critiquing Shakespeare per se. Shakespeare racist tha. Right. There are hardly any productions, whether you Habib Tanveer ki baat kare, you talk about M.K. Raina, you talk about all the major directors. They haven't even ventured because for them Shakespeare is still, they are still finding their own sort of. For instance, when I say Shakespeare today in a village called a kingdom in Kashmir, for people who are illiterate, they have found something in Shakespeare. They found that Shakespeare is very focused, right? They relate their stories with Shakespeare. Go to Chhattisgarh and you realize, these actors, these are tribal actors from Chhattisgarh, most of whom can't even read and write. They found something in Shakespeare, but it's on us. Now, if I said to translate Shakespeare, I find something which is very personal to me. I cannot say that, तुम्हें भी इतना ही मजा आएगा, but तुम्हारे लिए भी वही चीज सही है. But I think you may find, you can completely reject it. As Sir was saying that in England they're planning to chuck him out if they haven't already. But yes, there's, and that's why it's been 600 years people are talking about him, writing about him.
Ansh, can we wait for a second? Nilanjan has a question.
My question is actually related to what you just said. So I was wondering, when you mentioned names like Utpal Dutt, Habib Tanveer, they were political, right? They were part of IPTA, and they exuded a certain amount of commitment when they were, producing this plays. So what is there in Shakespeare which makes his plays amenable to that politics that they adhere to?
No,
and also you also mentioned that Utpal Dutt didn't want to intellectualize theatre, etc., and he was very critical of that. So from the thought that he adhered to, that is Marxist political thought, there is a role of intellectualism in performance, in the cultural, from the cultural aspect of it. So where does that negotiation lie?
Two things perhaps. Utpal Dutt, to the best of my knowledge, was, as he says, he was chucked out of IPTA. He joined IPTA only for 9 months, and there were charges against him, and he was chucked out of. By his own admission, he says, I joined IPTA only for 9 months and nothing to do with IPTA. Although he had, of course, political leanings, left leanings, everyone knows that. Now, I think he made this comment, when he was making this comment, it was during the specific period in his life when he was performing Shakespeare in the Jatra style. And he did close to, I think, 6 plays, 5 or 6 plays of Shakespeare with the Jatra actors, who were trained Jatra actors, and took it to villages throughout Bengal, performing Shakespeare in Jatra. the popular here, would perhaps mean that, I mean, at least to him, that it's an effort to de-intellectualize theater through the popular. And in fact, even for Habib Tanveer, who was a part of IPTA for a brief period of time, I mean, of course, more than Utpal Dutt, but even his kind of theater, if you look at most of his theater, whether it's Charandas Chor, whether it's Kamdev, I mean, they're political in a certain sense, but not necessarily outrightly, political. I mean, for instance, if by his own admission, he says, I have been influenced by Brecht, right? But the Brechtian politics, if you look, perhaps would be very different than the kind of politics that Habib Tanveer, appropriates from Brecht. So for instance, it's the aesthetic that he borrows, and not necessarily aesthetics for nothing. So for instance, there's a Bollywood adaptation of Bollywood film, and there is, let's say, any other play by Habib Tanveer. So Tanveer has a lot of music in it, but the music is not an ornament for Tanveer. Every song, let's say in a play like Charandas Chor, has a role to play, it has a dramatic function. Unlike very many adaptations, or unlike very many plays that were happening around that time in India, which were quote unquote exploiting folk forms to get funding from Sahitya Academy. Because you have to have something folkish about your play, only then you will get funding. Now, theater in India, unfortunately, is something which is not popular enterprise, right? You have to survive either on the government funding or on a corporate house. Pehle to corporate house bhi nahi the. So largely you have to depend upon funding. Now, who gets the funding? That is decided by the policies of the government. Post 60s, you realize there's a certain policy that you have to have folk, right? So Maheshal Kunchwar's play will never get funding, or Mohan Rakesh's play will never get funding, right? Because those are realist plays. How are they any different from a Western play, right? But Habib Tanveer, despite this, created something really, really wonderful. And that's why I say, even if he's taking on folk forms, he's not museumizing these folk forms. He's not exoticizing these folk forms, right? Charandas has a very strong message. It's a very strong political message that was true in 75, and it's true even now. And perhaps more even now. I mean, the kind of situation we are in, it makes much more sense today to watch a Charandas Chor, right? Or any other play by Tanveer. But to answer you, I think it's through the popular that they're trying to negotiate this intellectualism. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not intellectuals, or these plays are not worthy of intellectual attention. We have a certain sense of intellectualism, right? And that's why we think, oh, highbrow and, sab wahi sab theek hai. Yeah, Shakespeare Angrezi mein hi ho sakta hai. My wife teaches in a convent school, and they keep on doing Shakespeare, and I tell them, Shakespeare इतनी भाषाओं में क्यों नहीं करते? स्कूल से निकाल देंगे अगर अंग्रेजी के अलावा शेक्सपियर किसी और भाषा में कर लिया तो. Because you're taught from your childhood till 12th that Shakespeare can happen only in English. Right? Ngugi wa Thiong'o, for instance, makes a very interesting statement where he says, we were taught Shakespeare right from our childhood, and we were told that Shakespeare was so great, so great, so great, that when we grew up, we tried to find greatness even in Shakespeare's commas and full stops. यार comma लगाया है Shakespeare ने कुछ great होगा. यहाँ पे full stop क्यों है, वहाँ पे क्यों नहीं, कुछ great है इसमें. And that's the kind of attitude. So don't, I expect that we don't intellectualize Shakespeare like that. Or for that matter, theater. But theater is also entertainment. For me, the prime function is entertainment, and then any message, if there is a message. Message dena bhi zaruri nahi. Even someone like Vijay Tendulkar, for instance, would say, Vijay Tendulkar ke naatko mein to message milega hi milega. But he would say, I don't have any message to give. He says, I am a frog, and frogs don't give messages. So he says, I don't want to preach anything in my, but we know we derive whatever we want to derive from his plays. So
I think we have one or two more questions, but we can proceed if only if your time allows, sir.
Hello, sir. I'm Ansh. So while you were giving your talk, as you rightly pointed out that Indian cinema has its roots in, Parsi theater companies. They used to perform Shakespeare at the time. And gradually over the time period, they sort of adapted to the Indian audience, and they included songs and dancing and all of that. That worked well for the next 50 to 70 years. But lately, in the last 7 or 8 years, the Indian cinema has become more of sort of face value based sort of industry. Certain faces only sell movies, and if you have certain faces on the poster, the movie is going to sell, right? So it has sort of lost its charm. So what do you think that in today's time and today's cinema, what are some of the Shakespearean techniques that we can sort of introduce in our cinema to sort of reclaim that charm?
Again, I'm not a film scholar, so it's really, I haven't even watched many adaptations of Shakespeare. I mean, cinematic adaptations. But I think, to my mind, the biggest thing is if you compare, let's say, Shakespeare to the Bollywood, right? I think the first thing that comes with Shakespeare is that Shakespeare is entertaining. Shakespeare is writing for the popular stage. Shakespeare is not writing, again and again I'm saying, he's not writing for the classroom, right? So I think when we approach Shakespeare, I mean, if you're talking about, particularly about Shakespeare adaptations in Bollywood cinema, we need to approach Shakespeare with this mindset कि Shakespeare की greatness को भूल जाओ 2 minute के लिए, right? Treat him as a playwright who's writing for the popular stage. By virtue of producing the film, you already get into that zone, because अगर Shakespeare को भी adapt करना है, you'll have to make money. It's not that you can create a masterpiece out of Shakespeare and not earn anything. I mean, that won't be an approach of someone who's producing a film by the very nature. Now, it's possible in theater, right? All of us get together कि चलो यार Shakespeare करते हैं. ठीक है, उसमें कुछ पैसा नहीं लगता, कुछ नहीं लगता, ठीक है, थोड़ा सपने डाला, and we can do whatever we want to do with Shakespeare. We can intellectualize Shakespeare as much as we can, but that doesn't happen with the film by its very nature, because it's commercial. So the first thing I think, that is there is entertainment that you have to see. Now one can go on exploring the dramatic structure of Shakespeare and say that some of it works, some of it does not work. And one has to appropriate it. One has to sort of make those changes, and in there. But I can give you a formula that this will work or this will not work, other than the most important thing in theater, which is entertainment. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Don't make Shakespeare bore. That's what I can say. Kurosawa ka film in Hindustan mein laga do kaun dekhega? I'm sure, certain intellectuals would say, oh, what a film. But if you, put it on the screen, there will be hardly anyone enjoying that. I'm not saying it's a boring film, right? But then it requires a certain initiation into a cinema. That doesn't happen with Haider or Makbul.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Thank you for the very, very nice talk. Actually, I have this. It's not like a question. It's more like an opinion. And I was given this phrase by one of my critics when I was acting I acted in 2 plays consequently. One as Olivia from the 12th Night, and other as which, like, I actually was a flop actor as Olivia, but
Have you performed in English?
yeah, actually,
In
yes. It was like I was from the school, but my colleagues were from college. They were also.
Also, it was not a school production,
No,
but
it was-
outside.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So and the
And why
other,
do you think you failed? I mean, why do you say?
that's I'm yeah, I'll continue. So and the other play that I performed was I performed a Nautanki basically. So no, I wasn't a flop actor as Olivia. I was basically a flop actor as Portia. So I performed Merchant of Venice in English, and I did almost like 37, 38 performances, and
My goodness.
I failed in I think I failed in 21 or 22 because I was highly criticized by the public that I wasn't good at all. And but
If I may ask, what was that public like? I mean, where were you performing?
yeah, the public was basically the public of Uttar Pradesh because I started my play from Balia. I the first performance was in Balia, then I performed till Sitapur.
Wow.
Yeah, but the areas it had some like the judges were very posh. The judges read classic. The judges were like, you performed really well as Portia. But the public was like, Ki, we couldn't even understand one word that you said because of your accent that was so bad. And then
Bad was so good.
and the other play that I performed as Nautanki, the 12th night was the title of the play was Barahi. And I performed as Olivia, and I was praised by the audience, but I was highly criticized by the judge. And I was I was a top-notch actor at that time, but I wasn't like there was no audience. There was no audience when I was performing as Portia, but there was a huge crowd when I was performing as Olivia. And one of the critics, he is currently professor in Washington University. His name is Professor Jonathan Gill Harris, and he has a book. He has a very famous
Masala Shakespeare.
yeah, and he has that Masala Shakespeare. So when he was thinking about writing that book, he told me that the reason you failed as Portia is because you don't have Masala Shakespeare in your script. And he didn't even explain to me. He just told me this phrase, and it was very painful for me to hear from a big critic that you don't have Masala Shakespeare. And I was very confused, like, what is this Masala Shakespeare? Because I am performing in English. Where should I put the spice? Because as
See, it's not just one second. It's not about English. It's not about language. It's about masala can be in English as well, right? But the point is, I understand what he's hinting at. When masala is that entertainment, that he's referring to. That don't perform Shakespeare as if you were reading his play in a class for an exam. Which will perhaps make it very boring. Now, when a theater actor does it, even in English, I mean, there are hundreds of English productions of 12th Night, which are done so beautifully, which have all the masala in it, despite the fact that they are in English. But sometimes I shouldn't be saying this, but yeah, I read it somewhere. I'm forgetting it. When one of the critics was watching a play done by the Shakespeare Society of St. Stephen's at some point of time, said, when I watched the play, I felt like these are the last Englishmen on this earth. Right? Inke baad Angrezi khatam ho jayegi. They were even more English than the British. Right? So don't do this to Shakespeare. And I think, she should be performing here. I mean, you should perform here. In the college, and perhaps get in touch with your professors and see what works for you. But I'm telling you, do what works for you. It may not work for others, but if it works for you, you're successful. Right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Please introduce yourself.
Hello, sir. I am Sakshi. My question is if there are any aspects or features in Shakespearean plays which haven't been translated or adapted into Indian theatre successfully.
Which have not been.
Yeah.
Most of Shakespeare has been translated into most Indian languages. Now, if you say there are two things. A, if you're doing a Shakespeare translation, as a literary exercise, or you're doing it for stage. These are two different things, and one has to really keep it in mind that, are we talking about the literary Shakespeare जो लोग पढ़ेंगे या पढ़ाया जाएगा, or I am doing this particular adaptation or someone's translation or adaptation, whatever, is it going to be for stage? So for instance, if you talk about the first category, the literary, everything is available in most Indian languages. All 37 plays have been translated, but not all of them have been performed. Not all of, because they do not guarantee success. For instance, the tragedies, some of the comedies, they have been done pretty regularly and they've been translated with an eye on the stage, right? But then plays like, the history plays, for instance. Not many of these history plays have been performed on the Indian stage because they don't make much sense to Indians, because there's a very different historical context. So even if you try to appropriate that, perhaps has not worked in Indian theatre. So if you're asking me which are these plays, there are very many plays, including histories, or that are too violent. Not many. But as literary exercises, of course, most of these plays in most Indian languages have been translated.
I think we are done with the questions. Over to the comparing team.
Thank you, everyone, for this insightful discussion. We would also like to thank you once again, sir, for your delightful lecture and your warm thoughts.
I don't even get these many questions in class when I've taught Shakespeare. Believe me, this has been the most incredible audience, and I must congratulate you. I thought I'm going to speak in front of students. What kind of I didn't expect any questions from students at all. When I was a student, I would never ask a question. I've never asked a question. I've never posed a question to anyone in my life as a student. But even at my place, I don't get these many questions. I'm really happy. Either you have been threatened well by your teachers, or if it comes naturally to you, I must congratulate your teachers, and I wish for their safety and their. No, but that's. That's success for me, that I could perhaps got you so much interested that you asked these many questions. So thanks to the credit goes to me. But thank you.
I now request Dr. Sarvachetan Katoch, sir, Associate Professor and Convener of the Seminar and Conference Committee, Department of English, Shaheed Bhagat Singh College, to extend the vote of thanks for today's talk. Over to you, sir.
Acha, do I need mic? I don't think so. Anyway, this is the last ritual that I have to perform, and I'll be very formal. And I'll just do one thing. I'll invert this process of thanking, that we generally perform after every talk or after every event, for that matter. I'll start by thanking the students, despite all the threats. Perhaps there were unwritten, unsaid, subtle threats that were given to you. And I'm happy to see you all here. And I thank you all for being here, for being patient. Some of you wanted to leave. I made you sit back. Thank you for obeying the command, for that matter. But the thing is that someone said that, what can I find in Shakespeare, and Vikram, if I may call him Vikram, rightly pointed it out that you have to find it on your own, and that has to be discovered by engaging with Shakespeare, by taking Shakespeare home, by making Shakespeare your own, and that can never happen in English, because if you perform in Balia, and that too in English, no one will ever. They will rather go away from Shakespeare. They will definitely say why Shakespeare is Shakespeare, why he's so famous. So you have to make him Shakespeare, you know, and unless you make him Shakespeare, and it's like in Punjabi, you know, we call him Shakespeare, ki Shakespeare padhaya hai ki nahi padhaya. So he's from Northwest. I thought he would also talk about Shakespeare in Punjabi. He may have talked about it in his book. So Shakespeare, or for that matter, any great writer, you have to discover that, and that is why you are here. And another important thing is that many of you still confused about why study English literature, why study literature at all. And this first talk has perhaps done the job, that at least told you that why and what is it that you're going to get. So there is a lot that you can do with Shakespeare, or for that matter, any great literary writer that you will study during the course of your now 4 years of English honors. You know, so, and that has a market value also, as he rightly said. Shakespeare earned quite a lot. There is a commercial side of Shakespeare. He was one of the richest artists of his time, you know. So you can imagine what art can give you if you're trying to be an entrepreneur. So literature can make you a great entrepreneur. Whatever you want to do, you can do out of literature. But if you study political science or some other subject, you may be a focused person. You will only find one tunnel, and you have to cross the tunnel. Across the tunnel, if you manage to reach across the tunnel, then you'll find something. Otherwise, you'll be lost in the tunnel. But here, it is not a tunnel. You enter into a valley, and valley is open. So there is a whole lot of scopes that you have. So start with Shakespeare. You have studied Shakespeare, or you will study Shakespeare. Those who are in the first years, you'll get a lot of it, and you will find, and then take it home, translate it in your language. है ना, वो नौटंकी जो थी वो ज्यादा पॉपुलर हुई थी, और वो हमेशा पॉपुलर होगी. एंड आई एम हैप्पी दैट विक्रम also kept it in that tone of, you know, I would say indigenous form of Shakespeare, that Shakespeare. And this is another example what this talk would have given you. Beyond your classrooms, you know, we might find your teachers, or you may find your teachers teaching you Shakespeare in English, intellectualizing Shakespeare, but you will have to work with Shakespeare, experiment Shakespeare, not only Shakespeare, but every great playwright that you'll come across. So you'll have to do that. So it's good that we started with the bard, the great Shakespeare. And I thank now Dr. Thakur for bringing the bard to us, introducing the bard to the great English bard to our students. And I must say the talk was really, really profound. Your research reflected in your talk, and how much you have worked on Shakespeare. So thanks. I thank you a lot. And then I need to thank the team, you know, the seminar and conference. What is the committee? You know, seminar and conference committee. They all are sitting here. They are the stars. You know, starting with Apurva, you have already thanked her. She did a phenomenal job and fantastic job by writing emails, keeping in touch with you. So everyone else was off that burden, and she has managed it very well. So the all credit goes to Apurva, to Rhythm, you know, and we have been very economical in organizing these things. Rhythm is another teacher, you know. Oh, that's good. You know, so your names are already known to the speaker. Okay, so Pranay is there, Gaurav is there, Mohini is there, Kunal is there. Yeah. I'm sorry. You know, I'm not good at remembering names. So all of them have worked, but despite that, the teacher in charge, I really thank him for his freedom that he has given us to go ahead with the conference and seminar thing, and to decide on our topics, to decide on to work on our speakers and all of that. And the entire English department, Professor Nilanjana is here, Ira is here, Beena is here, Arun is here. So all the teachers, I really thank you. All the students, those who compared, those who worked tirelessly all through the work. They prepared their entire comparing thing, and I must say that you did a phenomenal, like really splendid job. You know, it was perhaps your first time, or maybe you have done it earlier. A little nervous you were, but as you started on with time, you realize that now you can do it. So excellent job, kudos to you, and thanks a lot for managing things, those who were managing the slides and the camera work. And we are really grateful to Wasif and his team for providing this live telecast to us. So your talk was is live, is still live. Is it still live? People may have been watching it somewhere across the globe. So Shakespeare and your talk is now across the globe. Shakespeare has already been there, but now you with Shakespeare. If at also the principal, yes, the authority, the highest authority that we have here, the administrative authority. So I thank him for being generous, for allowing us to hold such talks, and it being the first talk. So all of you, again, I thank you. I must thank anyone else. I must thank myself if if no one has left. But let's hope that we get more of such talks. And to conclude, I must say you may not have understood anything. All the students, you may not have understood anything. You may not have found any link to whatever Professor or Dr. Vikram Thakur was delivering. But with time, tomorrow when you go in your classrooms, you sit and you study Shakespeare, you will be reminded of his talk. You will be reminded of the things that he may have said. And that is the process of learning. It is cyclical. It may not, or you may not even remember him or recollect him, whatever he has said. But maybe sometimes when you grow old, when you really understand Shakespeare, if you continue your association with Shakespeare, then you'll realize, अरे यार एक बंदा आया था, वो कुछ तो बोल रहा था, लेकिन I could not get it at that time. Now I realize, अच्छा ये वो बोल रहा था. This is called epiphany. You will have many epiphanic moments like this. अब एक positive aspect है कि hopefully this YouTube will be there for years to come. 20 years later, 30 years later, you might go back to this YouTube and look for this talk, and then you'll try to correlate with it. So thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Thakur, again for being here and then and enlightening us with or introducing us to Shakespeare. Thank you.
Do I have just one last minute?
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to answer. Is it on? Hello. I don't think I satisfied your quest for what do I have in Shakespeare, what do I find in Shakespeare, what can you find in Shakespeare. I can give you my example, and this is what I gain from Shakespeare. And every different time I look at Shakespeare, I get something to find. I'll just read it out. I won't read the entire thing, but just जिंदगी गले लगाना ये मौत को चूमना, सवाल ये है क्या बेहतर है खामोशी से दिल में बर्दाश्त करना बेरहम किस्मत की अजियत को, या भिड़ जाना मुसीबतों के समंदर में और खत्म कर देना उन्हें जूझते हुए, मर जाना, ना सोना फिर कभी, और उस नींद के जरिए खत्म कर देना दिल के उन दर्दों 100,000 सदमों को जिनका जानशी है ये जिस्म. कौन न चाहेगा इस कद्र अनजान जिंदगी, मर जाना, सो जाना और इत्तफाकन ख्वाब देखना. आह, यही तो असल पेच है, खजा की उस नींद में क्या ख्वाब आएंगे जब तुम तज चुके होंगे इस फानी जिस्म को. यही ख्याल तो रोकते हैं हमें, इसी खौफ के मारे तो झेलते हैं हम इस उम्र दराज जिंदगी की बदबख्तियां, वगरना कौन बर्दाश्त करता वक्त की चाबुक को और उसके शदीद नफरत को, शद्दाद के जुल्म को, मगरूर की जिल्लत को, नागवार मोहब्बत के दर्द को, कानूनी आहिस्तगी को, कुर्सी नशीनों की बेअदबी को और बेलियाकत हिकारत को. जबकि आसान है एक बेनियाज खंजर के जरिए एक इस आलम फानी से वफात पाना. कौन सुदास जिंदगी के बोझ को ढोता गर जिंदगी के बाद एक गुमनाम डर न होता. उस नादीदा दियार जिसकी सरहद से कोई मुसाफिर न लौटा, जो फरेबन मजबूर करता है हमें अपनी गमजदगी बर्दाश्त करने के लिए और रोकता है अनजान विपदाओं के पीछे भागने से. इस तरह बनाता है हमारा ज़मीर बुज़दिल हमें और ज़्यादा सोचना कर देता है कमज़ोर, किसी काम को अंजाम देने की फ़ितरी आमादगी को। और राह से भटक कर रुक जाते हैं अहम काम। ज़रा धीरे बोलूँ, ओ दिलकश ओफेलिया, ओ हूर शमाइल, अपनी दुआओं में मेरे गुनाह मुआफ़ करना। थैंक यू।
I request everyone to please stay in the room for a group photograph.
Yes.
थोड़ा सा कॉर्नर्स वाले आगे आ जाओ। हाँ इधर इधर तो स्पेस है। आ जाओ। अब आ रहे सारे नीचे तक। इधर इधर आ जाओ। Thank you.